The courtroom went silent. Not because the judge spoke. Not because a verdict was read. But because someone whispered, "That wasn't supposed to be there." I didn't move. Across the room, his lawyer froze mid-sentence. The judge stopped turning the page. And the man who'd been so confident all morning finally really looked at me for the first time. The judge cleared her throat. "Who authorized this document?" No one answered. I watched his expression change, slowly, painfully, as he realized the case he thought he controlled had just slipped out of his hands. And that whatever happened next, he was no longer prepared for it. The recess didn't bring noise. It brought tension. People stood in clusters that didn't make sense anymore. Conversations started and stopped. Phones came out, then disappeared again. No one wanted to be the first to say the wrong thing. I stayed seated. Someone asked if I needed water. I shook my head. My hands were steady now. That surprised me more than anything else. Across the room, his legal team huddled tightly. One of them kept glancing toward the door, another kept checking his watch, then his phone, then the watch again. He didn't sit. He paced, slow at first, controlled, like someone trying to look unbothered while counting exits. The judge returned before anyone expected her to. When she took her seat, the room followed. She didn't call the room to order right away. She opened a folder instead. A different one this time, thicker, worn. She turned a page, then another. "Before we proceed," she said, "there's a procedural matter that needs to be addressed." His attorney straightened. "Your Honor." "With respect, we were under the impression." She looked up. "That was enough. This court has received material that directly affects jurisdiction." She continued, "and credibility." The second word landed harder than the first. I felt eyes shift toward me, not curiosity. Something closer to unease. The judge leaned forward. "I want to be very clear. This court does not take lightly the submission of false or incomplete disclosures." Silence again. She tapped the page in front of her. "Once, Mr. Morrison," she said, "did you personally review the financial statements submitted on your behalf?" He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. "Yes," he said. The judge nodded slowly. "All of them." His lawyer opened his mouth, closed it again. "Yes," he repeated. The judge flipped the page. Then she looked at me. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, "did you have access to these documents at any point during your marriage?" I stood. "Yes." His head snapped toward me. The judge raised her hand without looking at him. "Let her finish." "Yes," I said again. Evenly, but not the versions this court received. The room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, like a floor settling under new weight. The judge didn't react right away. She turned one page, then another. Her fingers stopped. She inhaled through her nose. "This court is ordering an immediate verification of assets," she said. "Effective today." His lawyer was on his feet now. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. So is omission," she replied calmly. She looked directly at him again. "And so is perjury." The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. For the first time, I saw sweat at his temple, not fear, calculation collapsing under pressure. The judge closed the folder. "We will resume once verification is complete," she said. "Until then, all motions are suspended." She paused. "And Mr. Morrison," she added, almost casually, "you are instructed not to move or reallocate any assets. Failure to comply will result in immediate consequences." The gavel came down. Not hard. Final. As the room erupted into whispered panic, his lawyer grabbed his arm. Too tight. Too desperate. He didn't pull away. He just stared at me. Not with anger. With the dawning understanding that whatever ID placed in front of that judge wasn't he just inconvenient. It was dangerous. And as I gathered my folder and walked toward the door, I felt it clearly for the first time. This wasn't a defense. It was the beginning of something he couldn't undo. The hallway felt narrower than before. People spilled out of the courtroom in uneven waves. Voices low, steps hurried, like everyone had somewhere urgent to be without knowing where to go. The energy was off. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just unsettled. I walked slowly. Not because I needed to. Because no one tried to stop me. Behind me, I heard his name once. Then again. Sharper this time. He didn't answer. I didn't turn around. Near the elevators, his attorney caught up to me. Mrs. Morrison. I stopped, but I didn't face him. You understand, he said carefully, that what you've submitted complicates things. I finally looked at him. I understand, I said. He studied my face like he was searching for something. Panic. Maybe, or regret. Whatever he was hoping to find, it wasn't there. This process can take time, he continued. Months, sometimes longer. I'm aware. A pause, and outcomes aren't guaranteed. I nodded once. They never are. He hesitated. Then leaned in slightly. If there's additional material you haven't disclosed yet. Now would be the moment to be transparent. I smiled, not wide, not sweet. I've been transparent. I said, just not loud. His jaw tightened. He stepped back, already done with the conversation. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside alone. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of him down the hall, surrounded now. No longer directing anything, just listening, absorbing. The ride down was silent. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper, like the city had shifted while we were inside. I stood on the courthouse steps and checked my phone for the first time that day. 3 missed calls. 1 voicemail. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked a block. Then another. Letting the noise thin out. Letting my thoughts settle into something usable. Halfway down the street, my phone rang again. I answered this time. You blindsided us, his voice said immediately. No greeting. No pretense. I submitted documents. I said, that's not a blindside. You knew exactly what you were doing. Yes, a breath on the other end, controlled, measured. This isn't over, he said. I know. Another pause. You're making things worse for yourself. I stopped walking, for the first time. I said quietly, I'm not measuring things that way. Silence stretched between us. Not courtroom silence. Something thinner, more personal. You think you've won something, he said finally. I don't think that, I replied. I think you've lost track of what you're standing on. He laughed once, short. Unconvincing. You always did like metaphors. I always liked patterns. I said. You just assumed I wasn't paying attention. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment longer, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. Then I lowered it and kept walking, because somewhere behind me, plans were being rewritten in a rush. And somewhere ahead of me, something I'd been waiting a long time to see had finally started to crack. The first thing that changed was the tone, not the messages themselves, just the way they were written. People who used to sound certain now chose their words carefully. Emails that once ended with confidence started ending with questions. Phone calls opened with politeness instead of authority. I noticed it immediately. By mid-morning, the requests began to arrive, not demands, requests. A former colleague asked if I was available to clarify a few things. An assistant I barely remembered wanted to confirm timelines. Someone else asked casually, almost apologetically, whether I was still represented. I answered none of them instead. I went through my day the same way I always had. Grocery store. Dry cleaning. A short walk that had nothing to do with thinking and everything to do with breathing. At the checkout line, my phone buzzed again. A message from a number I didn't recognize. We should meet. Neutral location. Coffee. I stared at the screen. Then I put my phone back in my pocket and paid for my groceries. When I got home, there was an envelope taped to my door. No stamp. No return address. Just my name, written carefully, like the person wanted it to look respectful. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a notice. Short. Clinical. Unemotional. It informed me that a scheduled transfer had been delayed pending review. That further action would require authorization. That questions should be directed to counsel. I folded the paper once and set it on the table. The thing about systems like that is they don't stop on their own. Once scrutiny begins, it widens. Every delay creates another. Every review uncovers the need for a second review. People start protecting themselves. That afternoon, someone finally said it out loud, not to me, to him. I know because he called immediately after. You talked to them, he said, not a question. I spoke when asked. I replied, you knew what would happen. Yes. His voice lowered. This affects more than just me. I leaned back in my chair. That was always true. A long pause. You could still help fix this. I considered that, not emotionally, practically. Fix, I said. Slowly, means different things to different people. He exhaled sharply. You're enjoying this? No, I said, I'm allowing it. Another pause, longer this time. I don't understand when you became like this. I closed my eyes. I didn't, I said, you just stopped needing me. Quiet. He didn't respond. The call ended without resolution. That evening, I received confirmation from Northline. The holds were expanding, not dramatically, methodically. A compliance review had triggered additional audits. Associated entities were now included. Temporary measures were becoming less temporary. Nothing illegal had been declared yet. But suspicion had entered the room, and suspicion, once invited, doesn't leave politely. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, across the street. Life continued exactly as it always had. Cars passed. Lights turned on. Someone laughed. Inside, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was someone I hadn't heard from in years. Are you okay? I saw something today. I think it's connected to you. I didn't reply right away. Because this part was important. Not the attention. Not the momentum. But the restraint. I had learned, over time, that the worst mistake people make when power shifts is announcing it. So I stayed quiet, and somewhere else, in an office that wasn't mine, someone realized too late that the problem wasn't the documents, it was the trail. The first person to break didn't call me. They called him. I found out later, the way these things always surface through a pause that lasts too long, through a conversation that ends abruptly, through a message that never gets returned. That morning, my phone stayed quiet. Too quiet. By noon it rang. I recognized the number, even though it had been years. Hi, the voice said. Careful. Polite. Overly so. It's been a long time. Yes, I said, it has. I wasn't sure if you'd take my call. I'm listening. Another pause. Then I think you should know, things are moving. I leaned against the counter. letting the weight of that sentence settle. How so? I asked. There are questions, the voice continued, more than before, and people are answering them. I waited. Not everyone, they added quickly. But enough for what? For things to stop being contained. I thanked them and hung up. An hour later, his assistant emailed me. Short. Professional. Too clean. Please confirm whether you are available for a brief conversation this afternoon. I didn't reply. Then came the message from someone else. He's furious. Not at you. At everyone. I read that one twice. Anger redirected is always a sign of panic. By mid-afternoon, the rumors had sharpened. Not louder, clearer. Details began to align. Timelines overlapped. People started comparing notes they'd never intended to share. I went out for a walk. The sky was overcast, heavy with rain it hadn't decided to release yet. The kind of day where everything feels like it's waiting for permission. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. I can't do this anymore, the voice said immediately. I recognized it now. You said you wouldn't involve me, they continued. You promised. I didn't call you. I said calmly, I know, they replied. That's the problem. I listened as they spoke quickly, nervously, about meetings that no longer included them, about documents being requested twice, about a tone that had shifted overnight. They asked me to verify things I've never been allowed to see, they said. Do you understand what that means? Yes, I said. It means they don't trust the answers they're getting. Silence. Then, quieter. If this goes where I think it's going, I need distance. I looked down at the sidewalk, cracked and uneven beneath my feet. Then take it, I said. You're not angry, no. A shaky breath on the other end. You always were better at this than he realized. The call ended. That evening, the news reached him, not officially, not yet. But loyalty has a sound when it fractures. It's subtle. Phones stop being answered. Meetings get postponed. Advice turns vague. He called me just after sunset. This time, there was no accusation in his voice. Only urgency. People are talking, he said. Yes, they're saying things that aren't true, then correct them. Another pause. I can't, he admitted. I closed my eyes. That was the moment. Not when the documents were submitted. Not when the accounts froze. But when he said that. Because control doesn't disappear all at once. It leaks. And once people notice the leak, they start stepping away from the spill. I ended the call without explanation. Later that night, I received a message from someone I hadn't expected to hear from at all. I think it's time I told them what I know. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I set the phone down, because the thing about truth is this: once someone else decides to carry it, you don't need to push anymore. The outside world didn't notice all at once. It never does. It started with a delay. An article that didn't publish when it was supposed to. A panel invitation quietly withdrawn. A meeting agenda revised an hour before it began. Small things. The kind people dismiss at first. That morning, I opened my email to find a message forwarded to me without comment. No greeting. No explanation. Just a subject line that read, "Quick question." Inside was a single paragraph. We're revisiting a past feature and noticed some discrepancies. Can you confirm whether you were involved in the financial structuring referenced below? I read it carefully, then I closed it, because once journalists start using words like revisiting, something has already shifted. By noon, his name appeared where it hadn't in a long time, not in headlines, not publicly questioned, just mentioned, cautiously, a quote removed here, a sentence softened there. A phrase like according to people familiar with the matter slipped into a piece that had nothing to do with him. That's how reputations begin to loosen, not with accusation, with uncertainty. My phone rang while I was making lunch. I'm hearing things, the voice said, familiar but distant now. Is it true? I don't know what you're hearing, I replied. That's not an answer. It's an honest one. They exhaled. People are distancing themselves. Yes, from him. They clarified, and from anything connected. I stirred the pot in front of me, slow and deliberate. That happens, I said, when no one wants to be the last person defending a story that's changing. Another pause. Were you always this composed? I smiled, faintly. I was always listening. That afternoon, something more visible happened, a board announcement, short, neutral, carefully worded, due to ongoing internal review. Mr. Morrison will be stepping back from select advisory roles. Stepping back. It sounded voluntary. No one believed it. By evening, the calls shifted again. Less aggressive. More cautious. People didn't ask what was happening anymore. They asked what I knew. And I didn't answer. Because the most effective thing I could do now was nothing. That night I saw him on television. Not speaking. Standing behind someone else. He looked smaller there. Not physically. Structurally. Like a man whose presence no longer anchored the room. Someone else spoke for him. Someone else framed the narrative. And I realized then that this wasn't about exposure anymore. It was about replacement. Once people sense a vacuum, they rush to fill it. My phone buzzed late. A message from him. They won't take my calls. I stared at the screen. Then typed back. They never answered mine either. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. No message came through. I set the phone down and turned off the light, because somewhere, in rooms I would never enter, decisions were being made without him. And that was the part no document could ever force. The first time he came to the apartment, he didn't knock. He used his key. I heard the door open while I was in the other room, the familiar sound landing wrong now, like a habit that no longer had permission. I didn't move. He stood there for a moment, waiting for me to appear the way I used to. When I didn't, he walked in. You changed the locks, he said finally. Yes. He nodded, like he'd expected that. Like he was collecting small confirmations of something he didn't want to name yet. They're reviewing everything, he said, moving farther inside. Not just the accounts, communications, old filings, people I haven't spoken to in years. I stayed quiet. They asked about you. That got his attention. He turned then, fully, watching my face. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You think this ends with me losing a few roles? Some credibility. I don't think about endings, I said. I think about accuracy. He laughed softly. You always did have a way of making things sound smaller than they are. No, I said. You did. The silence stretched. You know, he said finally, I defended you. I looked at him. From what? From being irrelevant. He said, from disappearing. I nodded slowly. You defended the version of me that stayed quiet. His jaw tightened. That version benefited us both. He said no. I replied, it benefited you. He stood abruptly and walked toward the window. Hands in his pockets, outside, the city moved on. Unaware, they're asking about things I don't remember, he said. About decisions that weren't technically mine. Then you should tell them that. He turned. You know that's not how it works. I know exactly how it works, I said. That's why I never interrupted you, that landed. He studied me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time and realizing how long he'd misread the situation. You planned this, he said. I shook my head. I prepared for it. He scoffed, what's the difference? Timing, I said, and patience. He looked away. They're saying if this continues. He said quietly, some people are going to distance themselves permanently. Yes, you're okay with that. I considered him, the man who once assumed permanence was something he could guarantee. I'm okay with things being accurate, I said. He stood there for a long time after that. Then, without another word, he picked up his jacket and walked out. The door closed softly behind him. I didn't lock it right away. Because this wasn't about shutting him out. It was about letting him feel, for once, what it's like when the world doesn't rearrange itself around your certainty. And as I finally turned the lock, I understood something clearly. This wasn't the part where he fought back. This was the part where he realized there was nothing left to fight with. The messages slowed after that, not because things were improving, because people had learned what silence meant. The next morning, I woke to a single notification, not from him. Not from anyone close to the situation. A calendar update, meeting canceled, no reschedule. Planned, I stared at it longer than I should have. That meeting had existed for years, quarterly. Automatic and touchable. Until it wasn't, by mid-morning, the cancellations multiplied. Not sent to me directly, forwarded, mentioned, referenced in conversations that weren't meant for my ears, someone said. They're restructuring, someone else said. It's temporary, no one said his name. That was the part that mattered. I went out for coffee. The barista recognized me, smiled the way people do when they think familiarity is still safe. Usual, she asked, yes, while I waited. I felt it before I heard it, the shift behind me. A pause in conversation, a space opening where someone had decided not to speak. I turned. Two people stood a few feet away, voices lowered to late. One of them caught my eye. The smile that followed was polite, careful. How are you? They asked. I'm well, that's good. They said quickly, good to hear. They didn't ask about him, they didn't need to that afternoon. The first official notice arrived, not dramatic, not threatening, just precise. It informed him that his advisory position had been suspended pending review. No timeline, no reassurance, just language that suggested patience was expected from someone who no longer had leverage. He called me an hour later. I've been asked to step away. He said, yes, they say it's procedural, yes, they won't give me a date, no silence. They're asking people to verify things. He continued, independently. I closed my eyes, independently. I repeated, they said it's standard, it is, I said, when they stopped trusting summaries. Another pause. You could help contextualize this. He said, you know how these people think. I know how they document, I replied, that's not fair. I opened my eyes and looked at the wall in front of me. Bare. Neutral. And interested. Fair, I said, was never part of the structure. His breath caught. Just slightly. You're punishing me, he said. No, I replied. I stopped absorbing it, the line went quiet. Then, softer, what do you want? I thought about that. I want accuracy, I said. Across the board, he didn't answer. That evening, a name appeared where his used to be, not replacing him outright, just positioned beside it, a contingency, the thing people prepare before they admit they're letting go. I watched the announcement scroll past on my screen. Brief and unremarkable, and I understood then that this was no longer about exposure or proof, it was about redundancy. Once you become replaceable, the story moves on without you, and for the first time, I felt something loosen inside me, not satisfaction, relief, because the unraveling was no longer loud. It was procedural. The messages slowed after that, not because things were improving, because people had learned what silence meant. The next morning, I woke to a single notification, not from him. Not from anyone close to the situation. A calendar update, meeting cancelled, no reschedule. Planned, I stared at it longer than I should have. That meeting had existed for years, quarterly. Automatic and touchable. Until it wasn't, by mid-morning, the cancellations multiplied. Not sent to me directly, forwarded, mentioned, referenced in conversations that weren't meant for my ears, someone said. They're restructuring, someone else said. It's temporary, no one said his name. That was the part that mattered. I went out for coffee. The barista recognized me, smiled the way people do when they think familiarity is still safe. Usual, she asked, yes, while I waited. I felt it before I heard it, the shift behind me. A pause in conversation, a space opening where someone had decided not to speak. I turned. Two people stood a few feet away, voices lowered to late. One of them caught my eye. The smile that followed was polite, careful. How are you? They asked. I'm well, that's good. They said quickly, good to hear. They didn't ask about him, they didn't need to that afternoon. The first official notice arrived, not dramatic, not threatening, just precise. It informed him that his advisory position had been suspended pending review. No timeline, no reassurance, just language that suggested patience was expected from someone who no longer had leverage. He called me an hour later. I've been asked to step away. He said, yes, they say it's procedural, yes, they won't give me a date, no silence. They're asking people to verify things. He continued, independently. I closed my eyes, independently. I repeated, they said it's standard, it is, I said, when they stopped trusting summaries. Another pause. You could help contextualize this. He said, you know how these people think. I know how they document, I replied, that's not fair. I opened my eyes and looked at the wall in front of me. Bare. Neutral. And interested. Fair, I said, was never part of the structure. His breath caught. Just slightly. You're punishing me, he said. No, I replied. I stopped absorbing it, the line went quiet. Then, softer, what do you want? I thought about that. I want accuracy, I said. Across the board, he didn't answer. That evening, a name appeared where his used to be, not replacing him outright, just positioned beside it, a contingency, the thing people prepare before they admit they're letting go. I watched the announcement scroll past on my screen. Brief and unremarkable, and I understood then that this was no longer about exposure or proof, it was about redundancy. Once you become replaceable, the story moves on without you, and for the first time, I felt something loosen inside me, not satisfaction, relief, because the unraveling was no longer loud. It was procedural. The last illusion didn't fall in public. There was no announcement, no article, no formal language to soften it. It fell quietly in a room I wasn't in. I found out through a message sent without context. They're separating from him. Completely. No subject line. No explanation. Just that sentence. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and finished what I was doing. That was the strangest part of all this. How ordinary everything still felt. The world hadn't paused to acknowledge the shift. It never does. Later that day, he came by again. This time he knocked. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. He looked smaller now. Not defeated. Just unanchored. Like someone who had spent years leaning on something solid, only to realize it had been hollow. They're done, he said, no anger, no disbelief, just statement. Yes, they didn't say it like that. He added quickly, they said they're restructuring, that they need distance, yes. They thanked me, he said. Almost incredulous for my contributions, I nodded, that's how it usually sounds. He sat down. Heavily, hands clasped together. I thought loyalty meant something, he said. It does, I replied. Just not forever. He looked up at me then, really looked. You could have burned everything down. He said, you didn't. I didn't need to. Why? He asked. Why not take more? I thought about that for a long moment because collapse doesn't need encouragement, I said, just space. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. They're still investigating, he said quietly. They might find things I don't even remember. I know. They might call you again. They can. He closed his eyes. And if they do, I'll answer, I said. The same way I always have, he laughed softly. You never raised your voice. I didn't have to. The silence between us wasn't hostile anymore. It was final. After a while he stood. I don't know what happens now, he said. I do, I replied. You wait, he nodded like that was the worst part. At the door he hesitated. You won't step in, he said. Not a question. No, he opened the door, paused once more, then left. I locked it behind him without hesitation this time. That night, I slept without dreaming. Because the thing he never understood was this. Power doesn't disappear when it's taken from you. It disappears when no one needs it anymore. The days after were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful. Just settled. Like dust after something heavy has been moved, and the air finally understands where it's allowed to rest. No more urgent messages. No more careful questions disguised as concern. The people who needed answers had found other ways to get them. The people who didn't had already stepped back. That was the real separation. Not the one written down, the one enacted. I heard about the review progressing from someone who shouldn't have been updating me at all. They spoke in generalities. The way people do when they're trying not to implicate themselves. It's thorough, they said. Broader than expected? Yes, I replied. They're tracing decisions now, not just outcomes. I thanked them and ended the call. That night, I went through old boxes I'd never unpacked after the move, things I'd kept without knowing why. Receipts, notes, calendars with handwriting that no longer felt like mine. I didn't feel angry looking at them, just observant. Patterns are easier to see once you know longer standing inside them. A week later, his name disappeared from a website I checked out of habit. No announcement, no archive, just gone. Someone else had taken the space. I felt a brief flicker of something then. Not triumph, not sadness, recognition. He called once more after that, not frantic, not demanding. Measured, I'm going to be questioned, he said. Yes, they want my cooperation, yes. They asked if I'd retain counsel, and have you? Yes, I waited. They asked about you, he added. What did you say? That you were precise, he replied. That you kept records, I closed my eyes. That was honest, I said. They asked if you'd be willing to clarify things. I am, I said. If asked, another pause. I wish I'd listened, he said quietly. I didn't respond. Because apologies that arrive this late aren't meant to repair. They're meant to soften the fall. After that, the calls stopped entirely. Weeks passed. Then months. I adjusted without ceremony. Changed routines. Made decisions without explaining them to anyone. Let silence do what it does. Best make space. One afternoon, I ran into someone we used to know well. They hesitated when they saw me. Then smiled. You seem lighter, they said. I am, I replied. They nodded, like that answered something for them. As I walked away, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. This story wasn't ending with him. It was ending with me no longer needing to watch it. I didn't hear about the conclusion right away. That surprised me at first. Then it didn't. These things don't end with a moment. They end with a thinning, fewer calls, fewer mentions. A name that stops appearing where it once felt permanent. I learned what happened through someone else's relief. It settled, they said. Mostly was enough. There were consequences. Formal ones. Quiet ones. Some written down. Some simply understood. The kind that don't follow you loudly, but make certain doors stop opening. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. The last time I saw him was accidental. A sidewalk. Late afternoon. The city doing what it always does, indifferent and busy. He was thinner. Older somehow. Not ruined. Just ordinary. He saw me at the same time I saw him. We stopped. No anger crossed his face. No resentment. Just recognition. I suppose this is where we pretend we don't know each other, he said. We don't have to pretend, I replied. He nodded. You got what you wanted. I thought about that. No, I said. I stopped carrying what you didn't want to hold. He studied me for a moment, then smiled. Not bitter. Just tired. You were always patient. He said yes, and I mistook that for weakness. I didn't correct him, because he finally understood the difference. We stood there a second longer than necessary. Then he stepped aside and let me pass. I didn't look back. Not because I was trying to be strong. Because there was nothing left behind me that required attention. That night, I sat by the window and watched the lights come on across the street, lives unfolding, stories continuing, none of them asking me to explain anything. And I realized something simple. Justice didn't arrive loudly, it didn't need witnesses, it didn't even need acknowledgement. It arrived when I no longer felt the need to speak, and that was enough.